All right, Matt, welcome to the BlockHash podcast, episode 199, one away from 200, getting super
Oh,
excited.
I was so close.
So close, 199, the infamous one away. But yeah, anyways, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on. A lot of stuff I want to talk about. Tell me a little bit to get started about yourself. How did you get into the space? What's your story? Kind of your background.
Sure, no, thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. So my initial background into the blockchain space is coming from primarily academia. So while I was in grad school, I remember getting the early cryptographic emails about Bitcoin and that Satoshi put out to the cryptographic community. And I wasn't really doing cryptography. I wasn't really looking at that as a field of study, but it was like kind of there in the background of your mind. And for the longest time, you just think, oh, this is kind of a cool little academic experiment, and just kind of see what's going to happen. So fast forward a couple of years after I had finished up my doctoral work, and I was getting ready to do a couple of postdocs abroad, and one of them was going to be in China and in Beijing. And so I wanted to be able to go ahead and pay for my housing and my residence ahead of time. And so I went ahead and I started looking into a couple of exchanges and everything, because at least at that time, everybody was touting the Bitcoin as a global remittance solution. So I'm like, oh well, if it's global remittance, then I can go ahead and maybe try to contact somebody who could take my Bitcoin and cash it out and bring some money down to the university to pay for my apartment ahead of time. And I contacted several different exchanges, tried to run up the flagpole to different management to see if anybody could help, and nobody actually offered any remittance solutions. And this is I think it was a bit of a disconnect between what the sort of the community was saying was what this technology could be used for versus what businesses and were actually providing as a service. And so by then, this took 3 or 4 months to kind of go through support and talk to people and get run up the ladder and so on. And I had started trading, bought Bitcoin on Bitstamp, and sort of had fallen down the rabbit hole since then. So this was back in 2014, before the low point of, I think it was around what one, depending on which exchange you're looking at, it was like what,
Mm-hmm.
167 or something. And I think I got in a couple months before that low point.
Cool. Was there anything in particular about it that made you want to actually do stuff in the space? I know a lot of people have some point in time or interesting aspect about crypto or blockchain that made them want to have a career in the space. Was there anything in particular that made you kind of feel like this is what you need to do?
So initially, it was just more, I wanted to have more exposure to the space as far as an investment opportunity. I
Hmm.
was just, like I'm from the States, and as far as what we had the bailouts in 2008, which essentially
Hmm.
predicated the entire Bitcoin sort of a release and adoption. And even then, nothing really changed as far as the amount of inflation, the amount of spending that we were seeing in the States on different programs, whether or not they were domestic or abroad. It really just didn't make sense to continue with those types of policies. And here I am, just for the first time getting out of grad school, having a real job, having some type of income, and looking at where could I
Hmm.
be putting my savings and my my wealth. And Bitcoin just became a much more attractive choice. Obviously, I was doing more besides just Bitcoin. I was trading altcoins throughout that entire time span. So as far as what got me more interested into coming into the space full time, it just got to the point where I had been doing my own research, doing getting caught up to speed with different consensus protocols, or at least what the community considered to be consensus, and and what they were actually adopting as far from a market perspective and purchasing, and then comparing that with what was actually proper consensus from an academic and formal definition perspective. And there was just this huge, also once more, like there's just a lot of disconnects between what is actually formal consensus and what people view to be formal, some type of consensus in the space. And it was just more about just identifying how I could provide more value. So either from a general academic perspective, diving deeper into the game theory, diving deeper into cryptography, how to come up with different designs for protocols, whether or not they're, at the, more probably at the game theoretic level, what would be more enticing to people and drive user engagement, drive adoption. And so it just got to the point where while I was trading, and obviously trading was by far the most profitable thing I've ever done in the space. I just didn't think that my skill sets were well utilized, and thought I had more to offer. And so then I started doing some advisory role stuff, and then shortly after, came across a couple of the team, the other co-founders from Aleph Zero, and we started up the project.
Yeah, were you doing like day trading and swing trading, or were you just buying and holding and felt like you got lucky, or well?
Mainly day trading and swing trading. So this would have been throughout 2015 to 2017 or so. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've done a lot of it too, and still do. It's very volatile, very very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing for sure. But I've had some success in it too. It's and you could probably make a career out of it if you're really dialed into the numbers and analytics. It's kind of fun too. I like the rush you get, the adrenaline rush from trying to follow all the numbers.
Yeah, I mean it's a completely different market, right? So I think at some point, I was staying up way too much and wasn't getting a lot of sleep properly. And so then I had to really rethink my trading strategy so that it would be more of a long-term, or, more about taking medium-term positions and longer-term positions, and as opposed to doing the daily swing trading. Because, if you're losing sleep because you're worried about a particular position, and you're worried about, price going down and everything, then you're not doing things right. So it took a bit of time to rethink a strategy that would be more acceptable to a more of a longer view of the of industry adoption, and identifying quality projects that I wanted to be sort of holding. But obviously, of course, whenever you're doing something, you're still playing the trend, but you're just not doing it at the minute candles. You're looking at the dailies or the monthlies, and trying to really focus on a longer view for what industry adoption is going to look like.
Yeah, that's the downfall.
But
Yeah,
I'm not here really to talk about trading strategies and everything like
oh,
that.
I know.
This is this is just like I say, it's just my experience. And so trading was like you say, it's the adrenaline, right? It's that
Yeah.
rush. So
Yeah, it's the sleep deprivation and the stress that eventually got to me too. And I was like, okay, I can't do this every single day. I gotta find a balance. So tell me what you guys are doing with Aleph Zero. You guys have this public blockchain doing private smart contracts, or private blockchain solutions as well. You guys got a whole suite of things you guys are developing. I saw on the site, which I'll pull up. But tell me a little bit about what your guys' goal is. What are you guys trying to achieve?
So what we are really building out is, everything we do, we start out from first principles. So we focus on the math, the computer science, and building out from the different foundational levels that have existed for essentially the last 4 decades within the distributed systems world, and also within the cryptography world. So obviously, of course, there are improvements that have been done over the last 40 years, but a lot of the core principles remain the same. So with that said, what we focus on, or what we have been building, is a layer one solution, so a novel layer one that is then powered by our own consensus protocol that we were able to get peer reviewed and published at a conference that the ACM put together back in 2019. And then with that, we've also been focusing on the privacy side so that we can have private smart contracts using techniques like secure multi-party computation to allow for data, basically private states within a smart contract. So if you think of a smart contract as a stateful object, it has some public data associated to it, balance information, other account details, and all this stuff is essentially public, right? It's all on the blockchain. But the question then becomes, what is absolutely necessary for that needs to be publicly viewed? Is there some information that could be more suited to be private? Or are there even applications for, say, enterprises that and corporates that have a higher level of interest to maintain some additional layer of data privacy for their publicly deployed applications? And so we really wanted to kind of hammer in on this as well, just because from an adoption perspective, whenever it comes to institutions, there's two things that we've seen that has been the primary roadblock, so to speak. And the first is the security aspect of the underlying system itself, which we address with our formal consensus protocol. And then the second would be the privacy angle, in the sense that if you're a company, you don't necessarily want to release particular details that might be sensitive data. And if you're doing this on a private consortium chain, that's it. While it's all doable, you still have a general problem in that you've been cut off from the global ecosystem, so to speak. So if you have Ethereum Enterprise or any of these other private Corda or R3, what have you, the issue becomes, while they're definitely useful internally within, say, a consortium, if you have, like, say, some type of data pool and there's some type of sharing that's occurring with these entities running these private chains, the problem still is that if you want to have access to new global customers, this entire ecosystem, then you still need to have a way of interacting with a public chain. And if you're not interacting with these public networks, then you're kind of cutting yourself off.
Gotcha. What are some things you guys are focusing on in particular from a use case perspective?
So we have from a use case perspective, what we're really working on doing is this privacy framework that's called Liminal. And the idea here is to allow for smart contract developers to use their pre-existing smart contracts on whatever platform that they've already deployed their solutions on. So whether or not this is on Ethereum or Cosmos or something else with the Cosmos SDK stack, or if it's on Polkadot, or if it's on Cello or Near, it really doesn't matter. As long as there exists some type of bridging layer between these other layer ones and Aleph, what we can do then is have the actual smart contract more or less stay roughly intact. There would be some modifications, but the idea is to minimize the surgery that's needed in order to achieve the privacy solutions that you're looking for. But then to have all the privacy stuff happen, sort of more native and internal to Aleph, and then from there being able to update the smart contract on the original chain whenever there's a different state that needs to be updated, or knowledge regarding the private the private notions of where the state is actually located at within Aleph. So there's a high level overview of how privacy works whenever you're thinking about data privacy. It's very similar to how RAID technology operates, in the sense that you have a redundant array of independent disks. These are all now, normally speaking, locally in the same geographical location, but now we can go ahead and take those different hard drives and separate them out globally and distribute them. And then the way that you can reconstruct the data is fundamentally the same in the sense that you have, like say you have a gigabyte of data, and now you want to go ahead and divide it out in such a way where maybe there's 10 different pieces, so 100 megabyte pieces each. And then you add in some extra redundancy information, say an additional 25 megabytes of data. And now the idea is that those 10 pieces, you only need 7 of them to reconstruct the original data set. And from a user's perspective, or rather from an owner perspective of who is controlling the data, they look at it, it's just raw, basically random information. So it just looks like bits. Looks like, for all intents and purposes, like random zeros and ones. But then because of the mathematical structure, the idea is that you can recombine the different pieces together to recreate the original data. And so this is a way of creating some type of obfuscation to hide the privacy of at least the data storage itself. Now, the actual stuff that we're doing with the secure multi-party computation doesn't work exactly the same way as that, but a lot of the same principles apply in the sense that you have some portion of say the number 10, and you want to divide up the number 10 in some, with say 4 or 5 different people. And the idea is that each of these people has a private version or a private state, and this is not communicated to anybody else. That's why it's private. And now maybe some other people or the same people have the number 5. It's distributed in the same way, and you want to multiply 10 times 5. And you want to do so without revealing that 10 and 5 are the actual numbers that you were using originally, but you want to have a publicly verifiable output of 50. Because 10 times 5 is 50. So the way that this is done is using these private key shares, where different people have different portions of 5 and different portions of 10. And then they run a bunch of computations locally. Once they get these computations locally done, they can then communicate that to everybody else. For the most part, it still looks like random raw data. There's nothing that leaks or reveals the original input amounts. And then once you have enough of the pieces for the end result, you can recombine them and put them together to get the verifiable output of 50.
Got it. A lot of technical detail there.
Trying to keep it as high level as possible, but that's roughly how you can think about what's happening with these types of cryptographic techniques.
Got it. When you talk about data privacy, are you mostly talking about metadata, or are you talking about front-facing data like someone's name, email address, and phone number?
Yeah, so you can do both, obviously. So you can have metadata where you're not disclosing what the actual metadata is. You just have, say, a hash of the data. And then the actual information would be off-chain somewhere else, and maybe the owner would get an update as to where that location of that information would be, or they're communicating through some side channels what the hash, if you have, say, so the idea is that you have a message, and this message is what you want to keep hidden, right? And that message is all this metadata. But if you just take a hash of that metadata, then and you publish that on the blockchain in a way that's enough a security, because all these hash functions are one way, meaning that if you just have a resulting hash, it's really, really difficult to do a brute force attack to find the original information. This is essentially the underpinnings of why the Bitcoin proof of work puzzle hash it allows for the level of security that exists there. And so you could have metadata that is hash and could be, you don't really have any information disclosed. And then also on the other end, you would also be able to do like select the disclosure for particular records in a database. That would include like name or address information, maybe age, verification. So you could do like verified credentials as an example, but then take the verified credentials, add in some anonymity aspects and privacy layer aspect, where whenever you disclose some of the information within that verified credential, you don't disclose everything. You only disclose what's needed for accessing a particular application.
What would be the primary benefit? Is it the privacy and optionality that you have to give that information to somebody, or would it be the ability to monetize that data that's kind of just stolen from you every single day? Or is it kind of combination?
I think it's a combination. So from our perspective, we want to give and create the tools to developers to to make these privacy enhancing technologies. And we just think that broadly speaking, there's a need for the market for this to exist. There, like if you really look at it, even within say the Android or iPhone ecosystems, right? Whenever you're looking at a mobile app, there's very little privacy even focused on there. It's still still ad selling, still things along these lines. And I think that there would be, or I would be interested myself if there were more solutions with that were more privacy focused, that didn't collect my data, didn't weren't like requiring me to go ahead and share data location, share access to files, all the stuff that is really completely unnecessary from the actual making the app work and do what it needs to do. These aren't really that's completely superfluous, right? So if instead there was more of a fee-based model for something that's more private, then I would be more willing to use those types of products. And I think that in a lot of sense it's just the issue is that most application developers don't have the tools available to them to actually create privacy enhancing applications. And so then also in the same way, they're not thinking about the monetization paradigm where normally speaking, it's well, let's collect this data, aggregate it, and then resell it whenever we have the appropriate approval, and so on. But I think that if instead you turn it on its head, where you say, okay, well, data in and of itself is owned by the user, is owned by the individual, and now they have that option of disclosing the data. They have the option of say selling it to third parties, and then they're paid in return. I think that's a completely different paradigm shift whenever it comes to data ownership. And this is essentially what we see within the entirety of the Web3 space, is this sort of turning this notion of the Web2 companies being the gatekeepers of data, reselling that to advertisers and so on and so forth, where now in sort of the Web3 paradigm, we're seeing everybody controlling their data themselves. And if they so choose, they're willing to go ahead and sell their data. And like if you also think about it, the Googles and Facebooks of the world, very few people who are actually using those platforms actually have access to those particular markets, right? In the sense that not everybody's in the US, not everybody has access to the US markets where they could potentially invest in the Facebook, invest in Google, and then reap the benefits of those companies selling the data to advertisers. This is not really available to a lot of people in developing nations. So I think that this allows for that kind of a better understanding of the market conditions, where we're not just having sort of the U.S. centric policy and U.S. centric design of selling data, but now it's taking into account a little bit more of the global nature of the internet and the economy.
Yeah, there's a lot of demand for it, and it's kind of the whole data thing is a sensitive topic, especially in the U.S. But do you think these big companies, like take Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Apple, will integrate stuff like this on blockchain for data privacy? Or do you think it's going to come down to those here in the industry to develop that stuff out and create these applications primarily?
I don't think that they're going to push for that kind of technology themselves. I mean, it just goes directly against their basic business model that they have.
It's true.
And it's just going to take a complete redesign of how they're going to be looking at making money. I mean, even with Facebook's, like Facebook and their rebrand to Meta, which is absolutely brilliant. So now the conversation from about Facebook is no longer about the data that they have and the facial recognition sort of software that they've and the entire database of faces and people's biometric data that they've accumulated over the last well, I guess this has been what 2006 is these, or 2005 is essentially when Facebook came out. I mean, so we're looking at like 16 years of data accumulation and data collection on their end, and they've just done this entire pivot to go to Meta and the metaverse. But the conversation is not about whether or not Meta is going to be doing that, and there's actually no stipulations to say that they can't. They've only made public, all Mark Zuckerberg has said is that publicly Facebook will no longer do this. But if Facebook is no more and they're moving to Meta, then like what's the point? It's like the emperor is not wearing any clothes.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe this was a very good business decision for Facebook overall to really focus on going into the metaverse and pushing it, since they already have a great product with Oculus. I do think it's going to make this whole data issue far worse, though, because now you're going to have people fully immersed into an environment thinking they can just be their true selves, and they're going to be collecting data on everything. And I feel like it's going to get far worse, maybe in the long term, but I don't know, maybe it'll get glossed over and they'll get away with it. It's definitely a huge need to integrate blockchain in some kind of way to kind of solve this before it gets out of hand. I don't think it's going to get any better.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I guess to summarize my answers here, I think that it's really a two-pronged approach, in the sense that we want to basically allow for developers to have that opportunity to make privacy enhancing applications. And also I think that generally speaking, data privacy is we're starting to see it being pushed as more of a fundamental right, even within the EU, which I mean, I'm not an EU citizen, but you have GDPR, and there's starting to be similar types of data privacy requirements, even in the States. You have California and so on. So I think that there's going to be a bit more of a push from the US side of things to protect their, the consumers and the citizenry. But I don't think it's in the interest of the Microsofts or the Googles to really push for additional privacy and to integrate directly with blockchain, at least in that setting. But as far as what we're doing whenever it comes to data privacy, is not necessarily even for application developers and for the community. It's also for enterprises that are looking at deploying applications on top of public platforms, right? So I think that there's still a missing component whenever you're talking about the enterprise adoption, and why we've had some of these stumbling blocks on that front. And I think privacy is a big reason for this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Or maybe more precisely, the lack of privacy, right? The lack of privacy solutions.
Are there other use cases that you guys are working on as well? Because I saw stuff on decentralized storage, I saw stuff on gaming. Are those other areas you guys want to tackle?
So the first areas that we're looking at would be more on privacy, private DeFi. So this would be ways of solving the miner extraction value problem using different cryptographic techniques. The idea is that you have what's called a submarine attack, or rather a submarine send. So what you would do is, whenever you're interacting with, say, a Uniswap, I mean, this is the most classical example. What are you doing? You're submitting a transaction to trade against this liquidity pool. And what are they doing? They're providing a quoted price for that trade. And what are some of the things that can potentially go wrong? Or in the case of a retail investor, somebody's just not a professional, not a power user. You're not running like these MEV bots. You're not doing front running, back running, sandwich attacks, and so on. What are your primary concerns? And your primary concern is that you don't want to necessarily leak out that you're doing a large trade or any trade to others. So what you want to be able to do is instead do some type of encrypted transaction where you're submitting a trade, but that trade in and of itself is hidden, right? Or at least in some way it has you're hiding information. But what you do also want to do is you want to make sure that the trade itself will be executed, right? So you basically, what you do is you submit an encrypted transaction, then the consensus approves that this transaction is valid. It's just you're basically have done some type of Byzantine agreement on the encrypted information itself, and then once the encrypted information has reached finality, you sort of can separate out the execution of that transaction from the actual commitment to the blockchain itself. So what you're really thinking of is whenever I send a transaction across the Bitcoin network, it's automatically committed and executed at the same time. Now, if instead it's more about let's just commit a transaction as being valid, wait for like a couple of blocks or however long, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, doesn't really matter. But there's some delay time where you've made a commitment of a transaction, but that commitment is essentially encrypted. So what you want to do is after you've had that commitment, you want to reveal the key shares that allow you to decrypt that message, right? So you've made so there's like, thousands of transactions that are occurring at the same time. Nobody knows, what they actually entail. So you don't really have any incentive to reorder those transactions because there's no knowledge regarding what the actual transactions are about. And then what you do is at a later stage, say 5-6 seconds later, you have somebody reveal the private keys in some way, like using these types of distributed key technologies, where they can go ahead and reveal 4 or 5 different private key shares. And then from there, everybody who's running a client can execute the command to update the state transition, because now they can decrypt the encrypted transaction that was committed. So this is, I think, very similar to what Osmosis is doing on the Cosmos network. But the idea is pretty straightforward, right? So you have some type of transaction, it's encrypted. The decryption keys are sent amongst some number of committee members, some number of validator nodes, separate from the actual separate from the people running the normal consensus protocol. And then once you have a commitment on the main chain where your primary validator set has approved it as a valid transaction, then this other set over here, this other set of miners or validators does what's called a cryptographic reveal. They reveal the underlying private key share, which then allows for everybody else who's participating in the network to decrypt the encrypted transaction and execute it accordingly. So this allows for quite a bit of, at least it doesn't necessarily solve all of the problems of miner extraction value. You do have some leakage of information, but you reduce the ability of different ordering attacks of transactions, because now you don't necessarily know who is bidding on what, and the order is not necessarily disclosed to everybody.
Got it. We do need to wrap up the episode slowly. This is really interesting stuff. We might actually have to do like a part 2 to fully kind of dive into everything. But as kind of a final question, why should developers build on Aleph versus building on another blockchain like Ethereum or for example? What's the main benefit for them to do so?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing is we're using WebAssembly as our primary, essentially the bytecode needed to deploy an application. Even Ethereum is starting to move away from Solidity and go towards a WASM type environment. So I think from that perspective, there's a lot more interest in the development of WebAssembly outside of the blockchain space than not. And so what's that mean is that there's going to be additional resources available for continuing improving for continual improvement of those tools. And I think that's probably one of the primary reasons that most projects now are moving towards WebAssembly for the smart contract layer. And then the other aspect would be just we have fast finality. We're working on we have a high throughput chain. I think we were able to get 88,000 transactions per second with 112 different nodes. And this was with a sub-second finality. Now, with all of that, that's doesn't include stuff that's happening within the virtual machine, which if you're running a smart contract, everything is being deployed within the virtual machine, and then things are happening at a software level. But we expect the ability of actually achieving near native performance, but that's still going to take a bit of time. As far as other reasons why, I mean, like I say, we just really take a modular approach with everything. Focus on security, having a deeper understanding of the math and the computer science principles that go into designing and building these types of distributed systems. So, I would like to say that we're trying to be approachable. I hope we're approachable, and so. But apart from that, I think that the other aspect is that we're not really trying to tell people to migrate their application away from Ethereum. We're not trying to say, migrate away from Cosmos. It's more about how can you operate in this multi-chain world where you have access to different tools that might be more efficient, might be more more beneficial for your project. But you're not necessarily doing a lot of disruption for your current user base, your current community. You're just basically creating new features that are available to you, so that you can have a better product.
Got it. I'll make sure people are able to find the website and the social media in the description for the episode. Is there any other places that they should go if they want to find out how they can start building things on Aleph, or to at least keep up with it and the timeline and what kind of stuff is coming out?
Definitely join our Discord. That's going to be where we're going to be, focusing our outreach to the developer community. Obviously, we have a Telegram, but Discord tends to be a little bit of a better format for being able to structure things and provide a more reasonable discourse for everything.
Okay, perfect. With that said, Matt, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today and really explain what Aleph Zero is all about and what you guys are trying to accomplish. I think people will really appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. Really appreciate it as well.
Of course, anytime. Talk to you in the future.